Hey, welcome back, everybody. Great to see you. Hopefully, we're having a wonderful end of the work week out there, and things are starting to get pretty exciting in the models for a time period right before Christmas that has potential to bring maybe 1+ snowstorms here east of the Mississippi. And some folks that, maybe wouldn't necessarily expect snow may be in the picture for this one. And we will break all that down for you in today's video. Now, before we get there, though, we do have a couple other things to talk about. We have an ice storm likely into portions of the country. We have a kind of strange pattern this coming week before we get into that active potential snowy pattern right before Christmas. Now, I will ask you, if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do so. Hit that bell for the latest notification so you're the first to hear about the latest model guidance and those latest runs of our models and a breakdown of that guidance. Like the video, comment, let me know where you're watching from, and let me know if you want to see a white Christmas where you live. Now, I will also briefly mention, if you haven't already and you would like to order your special 2025 GM weather calendar, link for that is in the description. I will probably close the orders for that in about 10 days or so, just so everyone can get their orders before the start of the new year. But we've actually had a good amount of people order them, so I'm very grateful for that. I appreciate it. And it means the world to me. With that said, though, let's go ahead and start talking weather here and jump on into that forecast. Now, currently with our water vapor loop, doing a good job at showing us kind of where the energy is flowing out there, where the jet stream is most active. And there's a couple places that you'll definitely notice that right now. We kind of have this atmospheric river of sorts pointed towards California, and I do think we are going to see an active period out west, probably for the next 5 days or so, before things once again calm down out there. But I'll tell you, there's something you learn pretty quick in meteorology, at least in the United States. When the west is active, normally the east calms down a little bit, and vice versa. When the east is super active, normally the west is pretty quiet. So we had an active period in the east. That's going to switch back out west. And then in about 7 days, I think we're going to switch it back again. And the cold and snowier pattern will once again return here for those of you watching in the east. But again, big atmospheric river out here and plenty of energy flying around is really kind of the main thing to take off of today's satellite loop. Now, as for radar imagery, really not a lot going on right now. Again, we're kind of in this little lull, but like I said, right off the California coast, it's not hard to find where that atmospheric river is. Strong low pressure off the Pacific Northwest, and then just really pumping this moisture in from way out into the Pacific towards the west. And eventually that moisture and storminess will cross the Rockies, and that's when we could see an ice concern here over the next couple of days. Now, we do still have a little bit of lake effect ongoing, but really the most of the lake effect fell yesterday. Today's going to be a little bit more quiet, again, as we kind of shift eyes towards that warmer pattern going into early next week. But before we get there, we will have a couple wintry places to talk about, including right now this little shield of snow making it through Ohio and into portions of Pennsylvania. By the way, if you did see snow yesterday or last night in Ohio, Indiana, or Illinois, definitely let me know in the comments. Would love to hear how that forecast ended up verifying on the ground. But other than that, folks, all the active fun stuff out west with that mountain snow and coastal rain ongoing. Now, you'll notice, though, we get to our watches, warnings, and advisories, and you're seeing some advisories and warnings in places that we didn't really have anything on the map. Obviously, kind of the big bullseye right in the center of the country here, Iowa, the entire state, through much of eastern Nebraska, northern Kansas, northeastern Kansas, at least southern Minnesota, and then extreme northwestern Illinois there under winter weather advisories. And you see this little kind of dark purple kind of color there. Those are ice storm warnings. Like I mentioned, ice is going to be a concern out here as we do have a lot of this mild Pacific air and Pacific storminess that we mentioned is going to work over what is very cold air at the surface. And that's going to have the chance to produce pretty significant icing, I think, going through kind of the weekend here. And we'll definitely break down the totals on that and the impacts that you will see from that potential storm system. Now, out west, we also have active weather, winter storm warnings, winter weather advisories, high wind watches, wind advisories, all the good stuff that you would see with a stormy pattern for sure. Now, let's go ahead and break this down, meteorology in minutes today, and kind of give you an idea of what we are expecting. Now, here's the first storm. This is for this afternoon. One piece of energy has already made it into the Rockies. You just can't really see it because it's kind of running into some dry air and not producing enough moisture and lift at the same time. But it is eventually going to exit the Rockies and get into the plains and tap into some more of that Gulf moisture, as well as really some Pacific moisture at the same time. And we'll have the chance to produce plenty of precipitation. And that is going to happen here over our difluent zone of this low pressure system. And unfortunately, that will be right on top of very cold air at the surface, and we're likely to see some pretty big ice totals. Now, there will be folks that see weather out of this that's not going to be ice to the south. We will likely see some rain from it, as it does kind of have a little bit of a front that kind of swings on through as well there. But that's just the first storm that we're watching in kind of this first half of the video. This is going to be the warmer, not so wintry half of the video. There's that first storm, and then another one behind it here. This is Monday afternoon. Again, this comes out of the Pacific, out of this kind of train of precipitation and energy that I mentioned earlier. This one also going to be a warmer system. You'll notice the track on these low pressures are quite far north here, and thus we're going to have plenty of warm weather into the southern and the eastern half of the country over the next 5 days or so. Before after that, I think about, we'll say 5 to 7 days from now, we get a pattern change. And we're going to watch this guy for that start of, once again, a cooler and snowier, stormier pattern east of the Mississippi. But before we get there, let's break down this warmer pattern first, as it's a little bit closer into time. And then I'll give you all the good information on that pattern change on down the road. All right, quickly starting out west, like I mentioned, winter weather will be something that we see out here, but really in the higher elevations. You'll notice one big storm system off the coast bringing plenty of coastal rain and Sierra Nevada all the way up through the Cascades snowfall, and then even that snow trying to get into the northern Rockies here and just bringing plenty of snow over the next couple of days. After that, we get into Saturday evening here into Sunday, a little bit of a lull, some precipitation, some wintry precipitation up into the northern Rockies through Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. And then after that, another storm system. Early next week, this is the Monday time frame. Once again, blasting through the coast, bringing plenty of rain and plenty of snow and wind as well, I will add. And that eventually works on through. And that's that second storm system that we talked about for the plains next week. And then I think after that, by the time we get to about next Wednesday, the pattern flips and the active weather once again returns to the east and the west, again getting in on a bit more of a kind of a lull, I guess is probably the best way to word it. Now, before we do get to that lull, though, we will have plenty of snow on the way here for you folks, and the highest of the totals likely going to be, in the Sierra Nevadas. And this is the next 72 hours, so even more after this, probably before that 5-day stretch is up. But just the next 3 days, plenty of snow, like I mentioned, down into California, up into the mountains of Oregon. Into Washington, definitely going to help out the ski resorts for sure, and plenty of snow also into portions of Idaho here, portions of Yellowstone National Park going to get a good amount of snow, and even down into the Salt Lake City, Utah area. In fact, if we even zoom this in, these peaks just to the east of the city here, really going to get some big time snow not far from Salt Lake City and up whatever interstate this is. I'm sure this is a pretty well-known interstate out west, but I don't know because I'm a Carolina boy. So either way, plenty of snow out in this part of the country for you folks to enjoy, and hopefully that snow will eventually translate eastbound and we can start getting it here on the eastern seaboard. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this icing potential. Like I said, we do have winter weather advisories. We even have ice storm warnings for much of Iowa and surrounding states. And this is something that I think is probably flying under the radar a little bit for a lot of folks, but don't let it, because I do think it's going to be a pretty big deal. Now, much of today, we're fine. It's really getting into this evening that that icy concern begins. Notice in the pink, that is freezing rain. In green, that is good old-fashioned just cold rain. But beginning to see some of that ice break out here into eastern Nebraska this evening. And that's really, unfortunately, just in time for that evening commute. So if you're traveling home from work, be aware of it. But this really blossoms into plenty of frozen precipitation. Pink is freezing rain, purple, sleet, and blue there is snowfall, according to this model at least. Overnight tonight, all-out winter storm beginning, and all-out ice storm there into eastern Iowa. And folks, this is a pretty big shield of ice. This is something that is going to accrete enough to cause plenty of problems. This is getting into tomorrow afternoon, ice still falling, rounds of it even getting up into portions of Minnesota, and then trying to sneak up into Wyoming and, Wisconsin rather, sorry. We were talking about the West, still had the West on the brain there. But into Wisconsin and even up into Michigan, beginning to see some of that wintry precipitation beginning to break out. Now, points south through Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, all just rain out of this one. But if we kind of zoom the whole thing out and show you the storm system and the progression of it into the extended period here, like I said, we've got all that winter weather that's going to happen back out in Iowa. We'll take a look at the totals on snow and ice in a moment. But we change it over to kind of one of the global models, and you'll notice that shield of rain and even some wintry precipitation on the northern end there. Another thing we need to watch for is Sunday morning. We could also see some wintry mischief down into the mountains of Virginia, up into Pennsylvania, West Virginia, maybe even the foothills of portions of Pennsylvania and Virginia. We've got this big time strong cold air damming setup. So you see this high pressure here, that's pumping plenty of cold air at the surface down into these areas, and you can see that ridging, which is denoted by a zigzag in meteorology, extending all the way down even into Georgia and Alabama. Now, it won't be cold enough down there to get frozen precipitation out of this storm, but it will probably start as a pretty cold rain Sunday, and in fact, probably stay a cold rain for much of the day in upstate South Carolina, the foothills of North Carolina, and into the foothills of Virginia. You'll see some of that wintry precipitation Sunday morning. And even into Sunday afternoon could hold on, but eventually warmer air prevails and we change over to rain through many of those areas. Now to the north, we could also see some snow showers into portions of New York State, maybe western Massachusetts and surrounding areas out of that one. Still probably enough cold air left over before then the next system begins to develop, and that will be the next talking point for the start of next week. But before we do that, let's go ahead and discuss the totals of ice and snow and sleet and everything else from the first storm. And this is the model I showed you, the high resolution rapid refresh. I mean, we've got some members here, or not members, but some areas rather, getting a quarter of an inch upwards to half an inch of ice, which I think is pretty realistic, honestly. Looking at the model, that would not surprise me at all to see some pretty high-end ice totals, and that's more than enough to cause roadway problems. In fact, that's basically undrivable conditions. That's also enough to take down some trees and cause other power outage issues. So really anyone into southern Minnesota, portions of kind of eastern Nebraska, and we'll say really the entire state of Iowa, just about specifically central Iowa, we'll say maybe east central Iowa. How about that? Going to have the highest chance of the accretion of ice. And like I said, I think it's going to be something that catches people off guard and something you're going to want to be prepared for. You'll also notice a couple places up into Wisconsin and maybe Minnesota, or Michigan rather, could pick up on a glaze to 1/10 of an inch. So it's not just Iowa we need to watch, it's other areas, but I think we're most confident on high impacts there on the areas that have the higher end colors on your map. Now, what about snowfall? That is also obviously a winter event here, and it's a little tough because a lot of the times the models will accumulate sleet as snow, so we're going to use the Kuchera total accumulation here, which is kind of just a better way to kind of try to get the sleet out of it and get the ratios right. And you'll notice there are some people I think that will see snow out of this, kind of a bullseye on a couple of models. We'll kind of just breeze through them and you'll get the idea of who has the highest chance. So this is the Euro model, the Canadian model, the GFS model, the Icon model, the NAM model, and the, actually I'm not sure what model that is, but it's the RDPS, so whatever model that is. You get the idea though, kind of I'd say the biggest bullseye is right up into here. Now, be aware, I think the totals on just about all of these are overdoing it. If I had to give you one model, it's probably the closest numbers-wise. I would say, honestly, probably this one or the Canadian. I don't think we're going to get big-time snow out of this. This is going to be more of an icing event, but you do get the idea that somebody here, maybe into northern Iowa, could get a quick inch to two of maybe some sleet and snow mix. But either way, this is not going to be your pretty, perfect, fluffy snow that maybe you would be hoping for in December. Going to be a lot more icy, and definitely will be some concerns with that. Now, what about the Northeast and kind of the northern mid-Atlantic here? Like I said, a little bit of some icing concerns here as well. Now, not super high on the blend of models here, but you do note here into extreme western Maryland, kind of some of the mountains of Pennsylvania here, and even down into Virginia and West Virginia, some ice showing up. Like I said, we'll need to watch for that Sunday morning into Sunday afternoon. Does that cold air at the surface hold on long enough to continue a bit of an ice threat throughout the day? I think it's very possible for sure. As for snowfall, I do think we will get some snow out of this system, even though we are kind of warming back up. It's been so cold recently. Some of that cold air is likely going to last long enough to kind of help us squeeze out a little bit of snow. Now, this up here into the Tug Hill, this is leftover lake effect. It's going to happen today. I did not put a segment in today's video for it because honestly, by the time most of you are watching this, it's going to be over and it's going to be in such a small little band that not many people are going to see it. But do note, there will be more lake effect today into this region, also up into portions of Ontario. And then you notice this bigger kind of blob here of lighter snowfall totals. That's going to give you that chance of snow with this next storm system. Not a lot. Again, a dusting to an inch plus in places, we'll say. Definitely will be something to watch there, but not expecting huge impacts out of that. But definitely Pennsylvania up into New York State going to be the highest chance of seeing some of those flakes fly on your Sunday. All right, that's the first storm system. Let's quickly talk about the second one now. Let's see, where are we in our time scale here? So actually back this up a little bit. All right, so there's the first storm. Like I mentioned, that's everything we just talked about. Here's that big high pressure system that we talked about. If I could draw an H, that would be helpful to everybody. Here's that cold air damming signal that we mentioned. That storm system working on through kind of Saturday into Sunday. After it, another low pressure developing, another piece of Pacific energy that makes it over the Rockies here. This is Monday afternoon, and notice, folks, a lot of rain out of this one as well, kind of here into the Mississippi Valley, up into the Ohio Valley. Some snow likely up into northern Minnesota, northern North Dakota, and up into Canada. But for most of us, really just a heavy rain out of that one. That'll definitely melt any snow you happen to have left on the ground. And all of that warm air going to get even up into the Northeast. This is by Monday evening into Tuesday. We've got very warm conditions. Really through the entire east and the southern half of the country. That's going to begin to melt a lot of that lake effect snow. So it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be kind of melting. It's going to have rain falling on it. But I do think after that storm system, that gets us into this time frame. This is next Wednesday. It's from this point on, about the 18th of December through Christmas, we'll say, that I think we flip the pattern once again, and you can see it. Look at these blue lines. This is kind of our rain-snow line once again working south, and a big pocket of cold air coming down out of Canada and trying to meet with some energy. So let's go ahead, let's begin the fun segment of this video, and let's talk about this potential Christmas time snow. So the way we're going to do this is by model. I'll start with the GFS. We're going to show three different maps: the 500 millibar height anomaly map, the 500 millibar vorticity map, and then the fun stuff, the surface map that shows you where it's raining, where it's snowing, and all of that. So we'll do that for the GFS and the European. Then we'll look at the ensembles and see if we have some support for both deterministic runs. And then we'll talk about the temperatures, and then I'll let you go and you can enjoy the rest of your Friday. All right, here we go. Starting with the GFS 500 millibar height anomaly maps. Really what this does is helps us show where we have pockets of colder air and where we have pockets of warmer air. Now, also with that colder air, that can help us kind of see where we're going to see some potential cyclogenesis or some formation of low pressure. And the GFS does a good job at showing that. All right, so we're going to start Wednesday afternoon. Again, I think this is kind of the start of the fun stuff. Now, everything between now and Wednesday is going to be those first two storm systems we talked about. Here we go, though. Wednesday afternoon into evening, this big block of cold air works down out of Canada, and we're going to call this storm number 1 on the second time frame. Now, I know earlier, maybe this might get a little confusing. Earlier, we talked about storm 1 and 2 in the warmer time period. Now we get to next Wednesday, restart the clock. We're going to go from BC to AD here, if you will. And this is the new storm number 1 during our colder time period. This is going to be right around the 18th, 19th. This is going to bring a pocket of cold air down out of Canada, like I mentioned. That'll cool things down, but this could also potentially kind of form low pressure here somewhere into the southeast and eventually potentially ride up the eastern seaboard or maybe through the Appalachian, an apse cutter as we call it. Now that kind of works on through. You'll notice all that blue. And then this is the fun part for you folks in the southeast. I'm sure you saw on social media yesterday kind of a crazy GFS forecast getting thrown around, and it did it again overnight. So it was not just a one-off run. Here's what happens. Another big piece, another pocket of cold air kind of breaks off, gets into the southeast, and what happens here is we've got some diffluence over an area of the coast that is already favorable due to some baroclinic instability, just meaning it's an area low pressure wants to form on its own here off the coast, and this would really help for that chance to maybe get this piece of energy to break down, bring its own energy, and then maybe phase with some more energy off the coast, and we could get a pretty big time storm. And remember, the blue is cold air, so we've got the cold air there. That's not a problem, and that kind of swings on through here. And then after that, things get a little more boring right around Christmas, at least on the operational run. Again, we'll take a look at ensembles as well. All right, what about vorticity map? Well, this is also very important. Here's storm number 1. Now, storm number 1 here, this one I don't think is going to be quite as likely to produce big snow for folks who haven't seen it this year. but it could still produce snow. Now, I think the more favored area is probably going to be the apps up into the interior northeast, and you'll see that on the surface map here in a second. But what is important about storm number one is establishing the pattern. It's very rare, at least in the south, that we get snow out of just kind of a first storm. It magically shows up, it brings its cold air and all that. That's not really how it happens down here. You kind of need a predecessor storm that sets the stage, if you will, brings the cold air. And then you need a storm right behind it to tap into that cold air. And that's basically exactly what the GFS does here. Here's storm number one, a very positively tilted trough, meaning we're going to get some pretty good cold air advection out of it, and then it eventually tries to become negative, could bring a storm up the coast, like I said. That's around the 18th, 19th, and then a second piece of energy dives down here. This is about the 22nd, the 21st, so just a day or two, maybe three after the first storm, and here we go, energy right along the southeast. It's already got the cold air from the first storm, plus bringing some of its own cold air, and then kind of cranks up a little bit along the coast here, just a couple days before Christmas. Now, here's what you care about. What does all of this show? What does this mean? Is it going to snow in my house? Well, I'll tell you right now, I can't tell you that. We're still well in advance, and right now we're just looking at pattern recognition, looking at the storm signals, comparing the models. But here we go, surface map from the GFS. Here's storm number one. You'll notice it's rain for most folks, except for the interior northeast. Like I said, I think storm number one isn't going to be a big I-95 storm. It's not going to be a Charlotte, a Columbia, an Atlanta storm. Well, in terms of rain probably, but not so much snowfall. But it could bring snow impacts either way. Just places that have already seen it up into the interior northeast could get big snow out of that. But more importantly, look at all this blue it drags down with it. See these blue lines? That is cold air that is moving south out of Canada behind the storm. Kind of here's the cold front. So imagine just a big cold front bringing the cold. And that's going to set the stage for that potential second piece of energy around the 21st, 22nd. Here it comes. Here comes another big shot of cold air, and it's almost like a little bit of a clipper. But really, what it is it's kind of an Arctic front that is producing just enough lift and vorticity here out of the northern stream. And you're seeing this, and you're like, all right, well, that's great and all. That doesn't look very exciting, but watch what happens. It's not just a clipper system that kind of quickly moves through and dies off. It begins to get invigorated a little bit and bumped up by some coastal energy. We begin to see diffluence over our baroclinic zone along the southeast coastline, and thus you get plenty of precipitation begin to bubble up and build, and we've got a winter weather event into the Carolinas outside of the mountains. On the GFS here, as far south as Atlanta, Columbia, Raleigh, Fayetteville, Charlotte, Greenville, Spartanburg, and even trying to get winter weather all the way down to the coast. And here's that baroclinic zone, that low pressure forming there off the Carolina coast, and then trying its best to ride up the coast and bring some sort of winter weather event. Now, spoiler alert, that is one model run. Now, granted, it's done it a couple times in a row, and the energy is there on other models, but I don't want you to take from this video that we're going to get a big snowstorm in the Carolinas. What I want you to take from this video is the ingredients are there for someone in the general vicinity of the southeast, the northeast, to get some sort of winter weather event right before Christmas. That's the best thing to take away from it at this point. And really, if you're going to take anything away from this video, wait till we look at the ensembles in just a moment. But here we go, European, same process. Let's do it all again. Storm number one, here it is, a bit different on the European. This is more of a cutoff low. The GFS kind of had a full stream energy connection here out of the north. The European, really just a little piece of energy that gets cut off and takes a very favorable track right along the southeast. And looking at this, you'd be like, all right, well, that is a perfect track for southern snow, right? Yes, but notice what's to the north of it, a big ridge. So we're not really getting an established connection of cold air. This ridge is kind of blocking that. So this ends up being a cold rain on the European with storm number one, which isn't different than the GFS, both of them showing kind of a cold rain here between both models. And definitely something that you will kind of take away from this section of the video. But we'll move it ahead. That kind of gets on out of here. And here is storm number two. You'll notice it is there on the European. It's there on the GFS. It's there on both of them. But they look a good bit different. The European has a ton of energy here. And you might think, all right, well, that's good. That would be even better for snow, right? Well, maybe. Now, it might not translate to the operational run when I show it to you in a second. But either way, you get the idea. One storm, two storm, and then the European really hangs around with that low pressure for quite some time, all the way up to kind of Christmas Eve. Now, what about the vorticity map? It's kind of similar in the sense that we have the same energy in the same places, just not quite connecting the same ways. Here's storm number one on the European. Like I said, really a cutoff low. Unfortunately, with this cutoff low, it's missing that cold air connection to the north. Like I said, just really a cold rain through much of the southeast. And then the European does ride that low all the way up into the northeast. That's when maybe it could have enough cold air to get something going. And behind it, look at this, same idea as the GFS, another trough of cold air. And in fact, this is even turning negatively tilted pretty quickly. And this could also produce a storm. So, the models are not exactly the same. And I'll even show this 10 days out, another little piece of energy, kind of in a favorable place for snow along the East Coast. Now, what does this mean on the operational run? Well, here's storm number one. Like I've mentioned many times, not a big snowmaker, but heavy rain into the southeast. This is next Thursday afternoon. And if you want an idea just how close is this to snow, let's take a sounding over Charlotte, and I'll give you all the goodies. Yeah, this is a solid 46 in rain. So not really all that close to snow. In fact, our freezing line is all the way up at 3 kilometers above the surface, or about 2 miles. So definitely not looking like a snow on the first storm, just to kind of reassure you there. But then that does work up the East Coast and gets into an area with colder air up into Canada, up into portions of the Northeast. Either way, though, this would be a big time storm just impact-wise. And then finally, that gets a connection to the north, and here comes that connection of cold air that moves to the south out of that second piece of energy. And do note, we've got some precipitation trying to break out here along the coast. It wants to form another storm. It just doesn't quite do it. And on this model, if it were to form anywhere, in fact, it'd probably be more kind of up into the Delmarva, and you're even seeing some of that precipitation here into Virginia, overlapping with that cold air, a huge northwest flow event out of this model run. And then after that, again, more little pieces of energy rotate around, and they just don't quite fully connect into something until well out into time. And then at that point, who cares? It's so far out there. All right, so I think the best thing to do here probably is going to be look at the ensembles. What are the chances of snow where you are? Well, let me just skip ahead to the fun stuff because all of that doesn't really matter. We'll get into next week. Here's storm number one signal. Again, I do think there is a little bit of a chance of snow with that one into the interior northeast, not the southeast. In fact, you'll even see some models trying to bring some snow even down into the southern plains with that. We'll watch it, monitor the trends. It's the second piece of energy. Just to remind you the time frame. First piece of energy, 18th, 19th of December. Second piece of energy, here it comes. That's the kind of 20th, 21st, 22nd, that time frame of December. So when I say this is right before Christmas, I mean it, folks. And it looks like the cold air could hang around long enough that it could turn into a white Christmas for whoever gets snow out of these storms. Here's a second signal, though, on the European, and notice the highest chance still in the Great Lakes and up into the Northeast, but some of those members getting snow down into the Mid-Atlantic, into the Southeast, and even along the I-95 corridor, seeing some members showing snow on the European, this is. And then you're noticing kind of even another signal for some snow. Check this out about, this is Christmas itself. You're noticing even more signals for some winter precipitation in the eastern half of the country. That tells me the pattern likely going to hold on for a while. What about the GFS? Well, I think it's kind of a similar look here. Here is the first storm signal. Actually, is this? Let me back this up a little bit. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So this is the first kind of storm signal on the GFS. Noticing, like I said, an area of snow potential in the east for sure. And then the second storm signal right into this time frame. The GFS kind of combines the two signals, honestly, but you get the idea. It's similar to the European, is the Northeast and the apps having the highest chance of snow out of this. Not a lot of members showing what the operational run GFS showed. Does that mean it's not going to happen? Not necessarily. Does that mean it is going to happen? Also not necessarily. But what it does tell me as a forecaster is we're going to need to get the ensembles on board to some of these deterministic model runs if we want some of the super fun solutions that we've seen kind of flying around on the internet over the past couple of days. And then we continue this out a little bit more at a time. And once more, we get towards Christmas Day itself. And, some members still keeping snow in the east. But at that point, you get so much spread in the ensembles, not necessarily because the pattern changes, but just more because you get so far in time, those big differences begin to show as it kind of is a parabolic increase in uncertainty with time with the models. Now, I did want to show you this. This is the blend of models. These are all the models thrown together, snow over the next 10 days, and you'll notice a pretty solid signal here into the Northeast, including portions of the I-95 corridor. So that, shows snow from Boston all the way down to DC, even and up into Maine. And I will say, this is probably one of the better signals we've seen for snow in the east in quite some time. Last winter was really a dud all the way around. This one, we'll see. So far, it started a lot better, but definitely seeing a pretty good signal between now and just before Christmas for some snow somewhere in the east. And I'll tell you, I think we're going to get a big storm, maybe two big storms, but we really just need to iron out the details on where is that storm going to be, how strong is it going to be, and all of that fun stuff. Final thing I'll show you, these are temperatures. This weekend, it still remains a little chilly in those CAD-favored regions in the east, but by the time we get to Monday, Tuesday, check out all this warm air ahead of those storm systems during the first time period I talked about, that warmer period. Then we get to next Wednesday, here comes the blue, once again diving south, and it looks like the peak of the cold right around that second storm signal time frame. So the 21st, the 22nd, the 20th, that ballpark looks to be the peak of the cold, and the GFS ensembles, they keep it here all the way for Christmas and then moderate a little bit more once we get towards New Year's. But to be fair, this map right here is the same thing they showed for the time period that now looks cold. So ultimately, who knows? But what I will tell you is I'll keep you up to date for sure as we continue to monitor the trends, monitor the changes, and keep on tracking this thing as we get a little bit closer into time. Alrighty, folks, with that said, y'all have a great rest of your day. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you all next time.